Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Steve Cuss. Being human is all about noticing the dynamics that infect our relationships, not just our relationship with people, but also our relationship with ourself, which is often the most elusive relationship. We don't tend to pay attention to what's going on in ourself, or we don't tend to consider that we're in relationship with ourself, and also our relationship with God. There are just certain dynamics that block our awareness of God, that block our well-being with ourselves, and create tension and dissonance with people. Things like reactivity, triggers, assumptions, stuck predictable patterns. These are the kinds of dynamics that we focus on the show. And each week we pause and we intentionally relax into God's presence. When we're not human-sized, we tend to either get bigger than human or smaller than human. When we're bigger than human, we're kind of trying to manage the world on our own strength. When we're smaller than human, we move into a self-protective state. And either way, we're depending on ourself instead of relaxing into God's presence. It's very common. It's a very human thing. So we just pause right now and we light a candle by faith to help us remember that God is with us and we're not alone. Let's light that now. One of the reasons you probably tune into this show is the way we integrate psychology and science and Bible and faith. We put it all together to try to help us be well. I'm really convicted by Jesus' question to the invalid at the pool of Siloam in the book of John, where Jesus just says to this guy, "Do you want to be well?" And it's so wild because this guy was for 38 years, he had been taken to the pool of Siloam hoping to be healed. There was this weird kind of belief or superstition that if the pool of Siloam's water stirred and you could get in it, you'd be healed. And so he had been dropped off by his friends and family for 38 years, wanting to get healed. And Jesus walks by and Jesus looks at him and says, "Do you want to be well?" And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because he doesn't say yes. He doesn't just say, "Yes, I want to be well." He makes an excuse. And I don't want to make too much of that story, but I'm fascinated by coping mechanisms that we all tend to revert to rather than being well. We know that they don't help us, but they're what we're used to and what we're familiar with, or for some of us, it's the only way we know to survive. And so instead of depending on being well with God, we tend to revert into our coping mechanisms. And today I brought some fantastic guests on the show to help us understand our coping mechanisms, and that's Cyd and Geoff Holsclaw. Cyd and Geoff have a wonderful podcast called Attaching to God. They also do intensives and cohorts and coaching. Cyd and Geoff have a wonderful book coming out in August called Landscapes of the Soul, where they do similar work to what I'm doing, where they're taking science and psychology and faith and Bible and putting it all together to help us in our relationship with ourselves and with God. What I love about Cyd and Geoff is they bring a unique point of view with attachment theory. So maybe you're familiar with attachment theory. We get into it on this episode, but they are really helping us understand it through the lens of how we can have a satisfying relationship with God. Let's take a look now. Oh, Geoff and Cyd, I've been really excited to have this conversation with you guys, partly, I think, because I've gotten to know you in the last couple of years, but also the whole point of this podcast is to help us notice the dynamics that infect our relationships. And the premise of this show is that actually it's the same dynamics that infect all our relationships. So not just our relationship with people, but also with ourselves and also with God. And that feels to me like a lot of your work as well. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would agree. It does feel like a lot of our work as well. I mean, especially in the way that we talk about attachment and in the way that we're always talking about how we view ourselves, how we view other people, and how we view God is all interrelated. And so it's really hard to have one way of relating to humans and a different way of relating to God and a different way of relating to ourselves. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, I
so
was
let's talk about attachment. Your podcast is Attaching to God.
Mhm.
is the name of it. We'll have a link in the show notes for folks. Man, I highly recommend it. It's just such great conversations on there. But what I have run into, I would call myself a rookie or an amateur with attachment theory. I do have the benefit of being married to an attachment therapist.
That helps.
It helps. But I have found in my audience that there are two uses of the word attachment. One has to do with a parenting approach with babies, and then one is your approach. I wonder if you'd just help us understand your approach or the difference between the two so we can get that straight.
Sure. Yeah, Geoff, you want to, yeah, I'll go.
Well,
I'll go.
I'll do the negative one, Cyd, and then you could do like the what we do. Yeah. So the attachment parenting is kind of like it unfortunately has been a little unhitched from the attachment research and the science side of the parent-child relationship, as well as what is often called the romantic attachment kind of research, which is couples and how they relate. And the parenting kind of adopted and pulled in all sorts of other kind of streams, and sometimes it has a real negative association. So people yeah, we have to differentiate. So we're in the streams of like the attachment science and the attachment kind of research and theory, not so much like the attachment parenting that you might get books on a popular level.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and what we mean by that sort of developmental approach is that, if the way we like to talk about it is if you think of yourself when you're born, it's like you're born into the world as a little scientist. And your early years of life, you're running experiments. And those experiments are sort of like what happens when I cry? What happens when I call for help? What happens when I have a really messy diaper? What happens when, I put my finger in the electrical socket? Whatever the case might be in those first couple years of your life, it's like you're running experiments to see when you put something out into the world, what happens? And so the data that you collect early on, and you're not doing it, of course, you're not actually aware of your experimentation, but the data that you collect and the conclusions that you draw from that data hugely impact your sense of identity of who I am and what it is like to be me. And it also hugely impacts the way that you interact with other people and what you expect from other people and what you believe is expected of you in relationship. And then, of course, it's also going to affect the way that you even see the world. The world is going to look dangerous, or it's going to look like an adventure, or it's going to look terrifying. It all depends on sort of those early experiments that you were running and the conclusions you drew from those early years. So that's the work that we're trying to do is help us understand what kinds of conclusions we were drawing and what kinds of strategies we were developing based on those sort of early conclusion experiments. And then, the really good news is that a strategy can be changed. And so once you can become more aware of the strategies that you're using to navigate your relationships and your world, then you can actually choose different strategies, run new experiments and, draw new conclusions.
Okay. So maybe lay out for us the core strategies or coping mechanisms or attachment styles.
Yeah, so I'll do the jungle. Geoff, you can do the desert. So we tried to simplify attachment language because in a lot of the attachment literature, some of the terms can be a little bit confusing. So a secure attachment, is going to feel very much like Psalm 23, like the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And this idea of even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of the death, I'm not alone. And I know that someone is with me and his rod and his staff are protecting me. And there's this hopefulness of I'm going to dwell in the house of the Lord. But then when you get into insecure attachments, there's, this one way of becoming insecurely attached is going to be the jungle, is what we call it. And if you think about life in a jungle, you have to be kind of on your guard. There's a lot of things in the jungle that can hurt you, that can harm you. And you probably need to carry a machete with you because things grow so fast that you have to hack back the growth to even be able to walk where you were yesterday. And so that kind of environment creates a hypervigilance of always sort of watching your people, watching the world around you, and always being on your guard, trying to be prepared and ready to respond when someone else is moving towards you or trying to initiate, a relationship with you, or they seem responsive to you. And that comes out of this sort of sense of the experiments that you ran early on to test the availability of your people in the world, kind of gave you this conclusion that sometimes people attend to you well, and sometimes they know what you need, but then other times they're either not available or they are there, but they have no idea what you need, and they're sort of misattuning with you. And so that's sort of the jungle insecurity. And then Geoff, you can talk about the desert.
Yeah, for the desert, you kind of get the opposite reaction is if in the jungle, you're not sure if your kind of attachment figures, your parents or caretakers are going to be available to you. So you're like hypervigilance. You're in the jungle, you're always looking. Is now a good time to connect? No, now it's not a good time. I'm going to like hold back. Oh, no, it is. I'm going to jump in, right? In the desert, you kind of get mostly a no to at least the social emotional experience of your caregivers is that they don't share much with you, and then they don't want you to share with them your strong emotions of disappointment or anger or fear, and so they avoid those emotions, and then you learn to avoid them yourself, and so you kind of start living in an emotional desert. And in an emotional desert, you kind of create lots of barriers to keep people away. You organize your life around ways to stay out of the sun, ways to collect the water, right? You're very organized. Everything is very rule following. And so you prioritize more like your independent life rather than seeking intimacy with others. You just spend life on your own.
So then, Cyd, the jungle, would that be the equivalent of anxious attachment? And then
Oh,
desert?
yeah. So a little pet peeve, I would say, is that I think there's a lot of anxiety in either avoidant or ambivalent attachment. And then we call it anxious attachment, but both have a lot of anxiety. I mean, you're the anxiety guy. I'm sure you know that too. But just this sense that, yeah, it would be it's sometimes called anxious attachment, sometimes called ambivalent. But it's that sort of hyper focused on relationship
Yeah.
and keeping people close and managing your relationships and making sure everybody around you is okay. Because when people around you are not okay, you can't be okay.
Yeah.
People in the jungle, if you observe them and interact with them, you do get that felt sense of anxiety emanating from them. People in the desert, they're just as anxious, but they're way better at hiding it. And they've hidden it so well that they don't even know that they're anxious. But when they do all these kind of like implicit studies, you find out that their body's still very activated in the same way that other people would be in an anxious state, but they're not aware of it. And then people observing them wouldn't be aware of it as quickly. So that's what, yeah,
One of
we're
my
all anxious, right?
Yeah, one of the coaches that works with me, Jimmy Carnes, he has a 3D printer, and one of his great hobbies is designing and printing things. He and his son often do that together.
Oh, fun.
And so he has made for us these differentiation, I don't know whether to call them dolls or action figures, but they're these kind of differentiation 3D printed dolls. And he's made them with various like sizes of hula hoops around them, representing how much your anxiety is pushing onto
Oh,
other people. And then if you
yeah.
just bring two dolls close together, you start to see how then the anxiety overlaps between them. And he made a little piece that slots between them. And then when you go distant, they're both still carrying the anxiety. Like it's quite a
Oh,
clever little
fun.
magnet system he has set
Wow.
up. But if you get close, there's anxiety between you. But then as you get distant, you think you're escaping the anxiety. All you're doing is taking it with you and creating
Hmm.
distance with a person. Geoff, I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, for sure. The anxiety for all these groups outside of a secure attachment is the anxiety of I don't really know where to get my attachment needs, the felt sense of belonging. I don't know how to get that fulfilled. And so in the jungle, you kind of like you put it in overdrive, and that's a certain kind of anxiety. In the desert, you kind of trick yourself into thinking you don't need those needs. You lie to yourself. I don't need to be connected. I don't feel left out. I'm happy to be alone. And you kind of lie to yourself and kind of lie to others. But, and that's your way of dealing with the anxiety. And so it looks smaller, but it's still there very much.
Yeah. And so, of course, a lot of your work is understanding our coping mechanisms or attachment styles and then the way it impacts our faith. I love the way you wrote in the beginning of the book, when you kind of, the book, by the way, Landscapes of the Soul, how the science and spirituality of attachment can move you into confident faith, courage, and connection. It's a killer subtitle.
Hmm.
But you guys are really showing us that I think almost every follower of Christ at some point we run into ourselves or we get stuck in our faith. And you're proposing that understanding these coping mechanisms can really help us in our faith.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're relational strategies and God is relational. And living in relationship with God, it's only natural that we would make assumptions about how God relates to us
Yeah.
based on how we've seen people in our lives relate to us, and that we need to relate to God in the same ways we relate with people. And so, I think we talk in the book about how some of that is we expect God to be like the people in our life, and then at other times we expect God to make up for all of the lack of the people in our life. But we do that in such a way that we don't change. We just expect God to be different, but we're still using the same survival strategies we use in our relationships, and so it still feels like there's a disconnect.
It feels to me like we all get through childhood and teenagehood. We probably, for most of us, at some point in our 20s, maybe in our teens, we notice that we can think about the way we think. So, like what you were describing about childhood and being a little scientist, it feels to me like a lot of that is just on autopilot. We're
Hmm.
just living our life, not realizing, as you said, Sid. But at some point, we're like, wait a minute. The way I'm living and thinking isn't automatically the way it has to be. Geoff, for you, was that a wake up call in your life? Was that a moment? Was it a gradual realization?
I think for me, it was more of a gradual realization that I, Cyd has a great story, maybe of more of her clear
Wake up call.
realization. For me, it was, you know, I got married when I was 22. So, and had our first kid when I was 25. It was right around in that area where becoming a father and looking back at my own, how I was fathered was probably that real big kind of like, oh, like there's a lot of gaps here that now I kind of have to make up answers to. And I don't want to be the way my dad is or was. So now I have to like proactively like fill in these gaps. And so I think that was probably my wake up call. And then Cyd was starting to do a lot of kind of work herself, and that prompted kind of more work with me. So, and maybe this is often with husbands, I did kind of follow in the wake of my relationship with Cyd and kind of her journey of discovery also. But I think a lot of it was becoming a new dad and being like, I need to do different and be better.
Sid, before we get to your wake up call, Geoff, just one more follow up on that. Um, when you became a follower of Christ, you gave your heart to Jesus. Did you then just assume that that would take care of it?
Take care of what? Take care of like whatever was wrong with me.
Yeah, I guess I'm projecting my assumption onto you, but I think my biggest surprise in my 20s was, wait a minute, hasn't the gospel fixed this? And then to realize,
Oh,
oh, like there's a whole lot of me that's blocking the gospel. And therefore, I actually have a lot of work to do. I think because maybe the way the gospel was presented to me was Jesus paid it all. That kind of, it's a
yeah,
gift of grace. He does everything required.
yeah.
I just remember feeling surprised that I had a punch list of items.
Hmm.
I
But yeah, I was
think
curious if that was your experience.
I that wasn't my experience, not in quite that way, but I feel like it was probably similar. But for me, being a couple years into marriage and even like while dating, all of a sudden you get that retroactive kind of like, oh, my family's not really the norm. like like families are different and marriages are different. And I went from a very um idealistic sense of my parents and my own upbringing to a much, not like a fatally critical, but much more critically, like a less naive, I guess. And so that prompted a lot of work, probably of like, oh, I'm not probably as whole of a person as I thought. My parents weren't model citizens and married couple. I have a lot of work to do, is kind of probably how it went for me. Does that sound about right, Cyd?
I think so. Yeah, that seems how I observed it. Yeah.
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 Sid, tell us about your wake up call. For you, it was more of a sudden realization.
Well, I think there were small realizations along the way of somehow I don't feel like the world is quite the same to me as it is to other people. But there was a big moment that was a huge wake up call for me, which was in, I think, that was our first year of marriage still, right? I think it was the
Right.
first couple months we were married even. And Geoff and I were sharing one car, and he was supposed to pick me up from work, but I had been at a different building because we were training in a different building. So he went to the wrong building to pick me up. And so he was later than he was supposed to be to pick me up. And we didn't have cell phones yet because we are that old. And so I couldn't call him. I didn't know where he was. And I had a serious, like, I didn't have language for it then, but it would have been, it was a panic attack, which then brought me not only like way up in my nervous system, like I over hyper activated. And then I just sort of almost collapsed and just completely shut down. It's almost got catatonic. And this is all like within a matter of minutes. And by the time Geoff arrived and I got into the car and just sort of burst into tears and I couldn't speak or anything, I think that was for me, that was a moment of like, I think that there's something that's not okay here because I don't think that this should be this big of a crisis for me that my husband was late picking me up. And so that was actually what sort of brought me into this.
Well, Cyd, you skipped quite a bit. Like, what was some of your internal narration of what
Yeah, well, I
was
was trying to keep
happening?
it short because Geoff
I
tells me
know,
I
but that
always
was a
tell my
little too
stories
short.
too long. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I was
Cyd's a
just
great storyteller.
it was just, I think I was having this narration of like, he's dead. He has to be dead. Or he's in trouble somewhere and no one knows he's in trouble and no one's there to help him. And so I was sort of having this, attack of like, okay, I was fluctuating between what in the world am I going to do? And these are my plans. Here's how I'm going to live from this day forward without my husband because he's dead. But it was like, it wasn't even, there weren't any other possibilities in my mind. It was just like, he's either dead or he's dying or he's in some sort of helpless situation and nobody knows about it. There was no, oh, I did switch buildings today. Maybe he went to the wrong building. That thought never entered my mind. And that's where, when I started sort of reflect, like, first of all, the feeling of that high level anxiety that basically just shut me down completely. I was like, this does not feel survivable. Like, if this happens again, I don't know how I can live with this. And then the other side of that was when I reflected of like, that's so strange. Like, why was that so like, I would even say it was traumatic for me that he was late, and it should not have been traumatic. And so that's what led me on the journey of like, how am I shaped in a particular way? What am I expecting from the world? Such that I would get to that point of just insanity, really, is what it felt like. And that's when I started to really start digging more. And that's when I learned that was before Bessel van der Kolk wrote The Body Keeps the Score, but it was like just starting to emerge into that understanding of like our bodies hold on to trauma. And that's when, my dad had been killed in a car accident and I was in the car when I was less than a year and a half old. And the story I always told myself about that was, I'm so young. There's no way I could have remembered that. That didn't, and that's how it was talked about in my family too, was just sort of like, that's in the past. We don't need to worry about that. But I think in that moment, and then I had recently lost my mom too. My mom died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. And so those sudden losses, I think hers, losing my mom probably just sort of unearthed all this other bracing myself in my body that I just didn't realize I was going through life constantly on my guard, always just waiting for the next horrible thing to happen because I had come to expect tragedy from the world. And
So,
then when
Cyd,
you
like the data you had collected from life had created this model of the people I care most about die suddenly.
yes.
And although you couldn't tell yourself that, that's what you brought to me being 30 minutes late was like, oh, I love him. He must have died. Like, that's the
Yeah,
conclusion, right?
which produced this strange sort of back and forth behavior in me, which was like, I've got to keep people really, really close. Oh, but now I'm getting too close. How will I survive their loss? Oh, I got to get close because I don't want to, oh, but now I'm going to, so that sort of, it's almost that insecurity, that anxiety around, I want to be close, but I'm scared to be close because I won't be able to handle losing you if I'm this close.
It's a fascinating way you just lay it out, kind of the automatic doom
Mm-hmm.
of getting too close to someone. One of the things I study is I just call it the universal sources of anxiety. Like if you are in this dynamic, you will be anxious. And what you
Mm-hmm.
just described, Cyd, is a classic double bind. You cannot win because you
Yeah.
can't stay distant because your coping mechanism is to get close. But by getting close, you're now going to off these people. Um,
Yeah.
y- you both work with people who carry significant trauma. I do too. And it seems to me that people cope with their trauma in two different ways. There's the way you just described, Cyd. It's like you're living your life, and out of nowhere, your life unfolds in an instant. Like you're just managing your life, and all of a sudden, Geoff's a little bit late to pick you up, and someone pulls the rug, and life's over, and then you're like, "What is going on? That's crazy." There's that. So, I guess I would describe that as the trauma shows up out of nowhere and takes over and reveals itself. There's a second category of people that are so used to their coping mechanisms they don't realize how hard they're working. That they've been carrying a massive weight above them for decades that they don't even know there's the weight up there because it's just so normalized.
Mm.
I would love to hear from each of you. What's the hope and good news for either the person, like you said, that kind of it takes over? And then what's the hope for the person that is so accustomed to it they don't even know how exhausting it is?
Hmm. Hmm. That's such a great question. Yeah. The hope, I would say, for both is that there is a different way, right? There is the possibility to do something different. You're not stuck in that place of being even disconnected from understanding the weight that you're carrying, and you're not stuck in that sort of invasive, intrusive trauma taking over place either. And I think that's just what's so amazing about God and the way that God is the perfect parent who's always attuned to us, who meets us right where we are and comes with great compassion and kindness, whether you are aware of your need for it or not. And then does this beautiful work of, I think, leading us step by step into the awareness that we require. And so just that, yeah, the hope is that God has something better and that he is willing to reveal it. And all we need to do is be curious.
I think I learned this significantly from Cyd. And this is the idea of like cultivating compassion for ourselves. And I know she got it from others, but, um, like even what you were talking about, Steve, like the ways that we cope or manage or are overtaken by anxiety, those were all kind of strategies that we adopted to survive in certain environments. And that's why we use like jungle and desert and war zone and pasture. Like these are environments that shape us. Um, and the good news is God has made us to survive and to adapt. And that might feel like bad news because you're like, I hate the way I adapted. But the good news is like you should have compassion because those worked for you. You survived. To say things like, "Oh, you made it out," but you made it through difficult circumstances. Um, and Cyd wasn't just stuck in a hole her whole life. Like she developed all sorts of things and we fell in love and she became a mother, right? Like there are things that her life is moving forward, but then she found that those things are kind of maladapted. So that first thing is that the hope is that like we can have compassion and just be like, oh yeah, that worked for me in a certain time and place. And if it's not working now, let's work on that. But let's not be so hard on
Mm-hmm.
ourselves about that coping strategy because it helped us. And then, of course, the good news is that there is hope for change and that God meets us even in that disordered kind of attachment and then helps us kind of reorder it and kind of make it into something that's much more full of love, full of joy, and full of hope.
I was working for a while on a church staff with a person who had disclosed their trauma to us. They were not private about it. They had told us some details about what happened to them in their teenagehood. It was horrific. Um, and I at that point I was pretty inexperienced with a lot of this kind of stuff. And if I had to describe their behavior, they had not gone and gotten any help for it. But we had created a very safe environment, which is why they disclosed it. They felt safe to share it with us, and we were very welcoming. And I had a cohort I was running of some of the stuff I do now. But when I looked at their behavior, they would blow people up and then act like they were blown up. So they would not all traumatized people doing this. I'm not making that claim. And I was really confused by it, didn't know what to do. And I went and got some coaching from a trauma therapist who herself is a survivor of the same trauma this person faced. And she was so helpful to me. She does staff trainings on trauma-informed care. And she said, what it's like if you've had something terrible and terrifying happen to your body is you put it in a lockbox way down deep. And you have these soldiers, these sets, like these rows and rows of soldiers between the outside world and your trauma. And she said, when I see your posture, Steve, and you're very kind. And so you've broken through their first line of defense just with your kindness. And then you have this cohort where they're safe, second line of defense. They disclose their trauma, you accept them, third line of defense. She said, you think you're really getting to know each other, but all you're doing is becoming more and more of a threat as you get closer to their lockbox. It gave me great empathy to realize the incredible courage it takes for people to walk in and unlock that box and get help.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I mean, even just, there are moments where I think I'm still aware that I have soldiers up. Even though, but I mean, it took me years to let Jesus through the soldiers.
Yeah.
So it's not just humans. It's also like, people used to say things to me like, God is with you and he sees it all. And that was terrifying to me.
Right.
That wasn't good news to me. And so it took a long time for me to even just, and that's, Jesus is so patient and tender and knows the pacing needed, but it just took such a long time for me to even be willing to let Jesus through. And then, let him through for like 30 seconds and then say, that's enough. Right. So even just that almost titrating the exposure to God himself, and then recognizing that, yeah, I mean, I still to this day struggle and have to work very hard at really letting people in, and not keeping people at arm's length because it's safer that way. But also, choosing well who are the people that I'm going to let all the way in, and how do I know that they're trustworthy? And how do I take care of myself even when I find that they're not, right? But that's, yeah, I don't really remember what you asked the question. I think I went off, went off a little bit. So I'll let Geoff pick up where.
Well, I, using like attachment language, our strategies come out most when we feel like attachment, stress, or threats, or distress, right? So when you're just at work and you're with coworkers, or you're not in a romantic relationship, your ability to cope with levels of stress or relational misattunements, or just kind of everyday letdown, or even kind of a big letdown like at work, could be really big. But then when you start letting somebody in, like you said, further into that soldiers, brigade or whatever, then that attachment bond becomes stronger, which you'd think would mean, oh, the relationship can bear so much more. The relationship is so much better because we're vulnerable. But your implicit nervous system feels worse, right? Oh, I'm much more attuned to the distress between relationships. So Cyd and I we can hurt each other way more than a coworker could hurt me, right? Because she knows like all the ways she could do it, but another, like my body and brain are just like very attentive to letting her down or feelings, right? And so those attachment wounds are so much closer when we are closer in those attachment relationships, whether that's parent and child, whether that's just really good friends, or whether that's a romantic attachment. So we always talk about, people say, well, how come when you come home after long days of work, then you blow up on the kids or you blow up on your spouse or something like that? And people will say, well, it's because I was tired. I had a long day. I was frustrated. I was like, maybe, but the truth is you went from low attachment relationships to high attachment relationships. And then all of a sudden your needs weren't being met. And then all of a sudden all these unhelpful strategies started showing up. And so you have a big fight at home when you didn't have a big fight at work.
What's your guys' take on the way we talk about faith in church? It's a big question, which means there's generalizations. But if we caricature it, I came to faith through a youth group in the 1980s. I'll just say I look back with nothing but gratitude and an affection. So what I'm about to say sounds like a criticism, but I owe so much to it. But the language we used about our faith was superlative. It was 100%, all in, sold out, like these unreachable standards, I would describe them as. I have the similar experience with Bible college as youth group, very fond of my Bible college experience, but we were all young. I don't think I could blame the professors. I think as students, we reinforce the 100% sold out, all in.
Yeah.
But you guys invite a posture of patience and growth and steady as she goes, chip away. I can't tell if we are growing as a church or not in the way we talk about faith in Christ, or if we're still using all of that superlative out of reach language. What's your reaction to that?
I'll jump in, and then Cyd, you can correct it, or whatever. I would say, one, there's like a life stage thing, too, especially for teenagers, right? So that's a high independence, high energy, and in a sense, a high experimentation kind of time of life. And when we look at the attachment research, it says that we have two capacities that need to grow together. One is a high capacity for independence. So that's problem solving, that's go-getting, that's the 100% of faith. That's like high obedience language maybe you get in some of these discipleship circles, like we need to obey, we have to follow orders, we have to go do, we have to, the Great Commission, we need to save all the countries. So it's a big going out. The other kind of capacity, along with the independence, is also intimacy, which is being able to be vulnerable with others, to be close to others. It's more of the social, emotional kind of skills. And I think in a lot of churches, those two capacities sometimes are pitted against each other, like one is good and the other one's bad. So we need to be high intimacy with God, and then God loves us no matter what we do. And then sometimes it's the other way. We almost tilt into like God only loves us when we do the right thing. So that's a high independence side. And I think what we really need is churches and discipleship cultures that do both, that will say, like, hey, you have a lot of energy. That's great. Like, we want to flourish that. We want to give it good direction, but we also want you to remember that God loves you no matter what. And that when you fail, God is still here, and we're still here for one another. And then other churches or church cultures are very much that grace, that love, God accepts us, and that's good. And that's great. Right. But we also need to, kind of say, hey, it's great to be in God's family, but God has called his family to act and live a certain way in the world. And principally, it's to bring other people into the family and to share his love and to take care of people and their needs. And so there's things we need to do in order to do that. So I think a lot of times we don't have that balance where we take those two kind of attachment capacities that God has built into us as the image of God. And churches aren't always great at balancing building both of those.
Yeah, I think I would say, and we are pastors. I know a lot of pastors. I care deeply for pastors, and I understand a lot of the complexity of being a pastor. So I don't want to hear any pastors me saying I'm not going to gang up on you here, but I do think that a lot of what I personally see or have felt myself as a pastor is that sense that it's easier for us as leaders when people can be all in and sold out and 100%. And I think, we want to convince ourselves that it's possible that the old self is truly and completely, entirely gone. And there really is only newness in Christ. And that covers all of our habits, all of our thinking, all of our ways of being. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible if that really if we experienced life in such a way? And I mean, we can talk about, I do believe that verse is actually true, but not in the way that we always want to believe it. Right. And so I think that, when I first came back to faith again in my early 20s, I don't know how many times people told me, don't worry about it. Your old self is gone. You're made new in Christ. But then I was like, but I don't feel new. Like I still see all the old, like I don't feel new. And so I think some of that maybe just comes from just this misunderstanding of what some of that language is all about. And if we look back at, older spiritual traditions, like back to the desert fathers and mothers, there is more of a slow, gradual, day by day. God loves us unconditionally for the sinners that we are. And you read these short stories or these pithy statements from the desert fathers and mothers, from these brothers and sisters, and there's just such a humility in that I have not yet arrived, and I am only sharing with you what I know so far. And I don't know exactly why in our day and age it seems so important to feel like you are the expert or you are further along, or that somehow people won't respect you or won't listen to you if you don't speak from a place of being further ahead or from greater authority. But I find myself longing for more leadership that looks more like those desert fathers and mothers that just say, "Who am I to accuse you of anything? Look at me. I'm still on the way." And so I think that for me, that would really contribute to a church culture of being gradual if we have leaders who can say, "I'm still working this out. I still don't feel like I'm entirely made new. I'm still on my way."
Hmm. My guests, Cyd and Geoff Holsclaw, their book coming out in August, Landscapes of the Soul. It is a fascinating combination of attachment theory and spirituality. Um, what I love about the book is they actually start by showing us like the positive side, and then they help us kind of figure out our own attachment style, and then they really flesh it out into the impact of our own faith, our relationship with God. Geoff, if people were to take one thing from this book, what would that be?
I hope it would be, this is probably our life's work because it's also the theme of our previous book. I hope it'd be something like God delights in us. And when we connect with God's delight, that actually starts changing us, not just spiritually, but neurologically. And it creates more capacity and transformation for us. And so I think just God's shining face, like the blessing from Aaron or for Aaron over Israel, that God would, turn his face toward us and shine his beaming face at us, and that we would learn how to live in that space.
Hmm. Well, you guys have been fearfully putting it off, but it is time for the Being Human Gauntlet of Anxiety questions. We actually just have time for 3 today. These are the cruel combination of deep questions with a
I'll
rapid.
let Cyd do all 3.
Oh, I don't think that's permittable. Just because you're a Being Human alumni.
That's right. That's right.
All right. So 3 questions, rapid fire, short answer style. We'll go real simple. Cyd, let's start with you. What would be an asset and a liability that you've inherited from your family of origin?
Oh, okay. An asset would be a sense that I can do anything. And a liability would be a sense that I can do anything. So there you go. I was raised by a very, yeah, I guess you said short answer, so I don't get to elaborate. But yeah, I think
Okay.
that's both my asset and my liability.
Oftentimes the case, the 2 sides of the same coin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Geoff, what have you
Mm.
got for us?
I would probably say it's kind of the asset and the liability, as I came from a very thoughtful, academic, intellectual kind of family, or at least I got that from my dad. And so that's definitely an asset that I bring, and I, love the Bible. But it is kind of a liability, is that I over cognitivize things. I'm disconnected from my body and my emotions. And then I'm liable just to kind of solve the problem with more ideas than kind of listen and be in the midst of pain or something.
Yes, I believe they call it feelings repressed. It takes one to know one for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, second question. Where do you find yourself running into yourself again and again lately? a trait about yourself that you're ready to graduate from?
All right. Well, I can be quick with this one. I am embarking on probably the biggest project of my life, and I'm constantly running into my sense that um which is funny because I just said my asset, my liability is that I can do anything. I'm constantly running into the sense of overwhelm that like I can't be taken seriously. I am a joke. And who am I to think that I can do a project this big? This is ridiculous. And I'm so ready to be done with that. So that's mine.
And the training project is going to be amazing. I think mine is I can't um I can't stop. Like just the busyness. I was on a call with someone and they're like, "Oh, you're just so busy." I'm like, "I don't really talk about being busy." And they're just like, "I can tell you're busy." I'm like, "Yeah, probably you're right." So I just like needing to slow down.
Yeah. Okay. Unstructured time. Okay. Final question. Do each of you have a helpful micro habit for our audience that helps you connect yourself, connect to God? A micro habit, something that takes 1 minute to 10 minutes. It can be anything that you practice that just helps you remember God.
I'll start. I've been just praying the Jesus prayer quite a bit and kind of moment. Thankfully, it's getting to the point where it just kind of pops into mind. So it's Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And so I just pray that a lot more. And so, yeah, that's been good.
Yeah, I think for me, I just put my hands over my heart, just sort of across my body, which, just feels good generally. Take a deep breath and try to just say to myself, Lord, you see me. You hear my thoughts right now. You know what's going on and you get it. And I'm so glad you're with me and that you're for me. And so that's a quick one for me that I'll use throughout. Yeah.
Wonderful. My guests are Geoff and Cyd Holsclaw. They have a number of projects, including a doctoral degree at Western Seminary that they help oversee. We'll have links to their website, their upcoming book for pre-order, their podcast, Attaching to God. Geoff and Cyd, thanks so much for joining me on Being Human.
Yeah. Thank you for having us, Steve.
It's been a delight.